Robot Talk is the podcast that sits down with roboticists from around the world and asks them the questions you always wanted answered. Like, is there a robot in that tree? And how does that thing work? Hello everyone! Welcome to Robot Talk. I'm your host, Claire Asher, and this week we're returning to a topic that's very close to my heart: environmental robotics. I'm finding out how robots can help ecologists to gather data about the natural world, and how roboticists are designing more adaptable and rugged robots that are up to the challenge. Before that, this is your regular reminder to join the Robot Talk community on Patreon, where you'll find exclusive behind-the-scenes updates, monthly bonus episodes, and opportunities to have your say about the future direction of the podcast. Check out patreon.com/Claire Asher to find out more. So, with all that said, it's time for me to introduce this week's guest. I recently had a wonderful discussion with Stefano Mintchev from ETH Zürich about robots to explore and monitor the natural environment. This week, I'm talking to Stefano Mintchev, an assistant professor of environmental robotics at ETH Zürich, working on bioinspired robotic technologies for monitoring and promoting the sustainable use of natural resources. Hi, Stefano. Welcome to Robot Talk.
Hi. Thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
So you lead the Environmental Robotics Lab at ETH Zürich. So to get us started, can you tell us a little bit about the current research that's going on in your lab?
Yeah, absolutely. In my lab, we work on two lines of research. So first of all, we are mostly interested in making robots that are fit for the wild, which basically means having robots with the right level of adaptability and versatility to cope with the natural world, which is often very unpredictable and dynamic.
Yeah.
And so we look at how we can design better robots, looking at the sensing and a bit more and more also on control strategy. And our main case studies are mostly area robots for flight in dense vegetation, or also to perform kind of interactive tasks like deploying sensors or perching or climbing. And the other line of research is pretty much interdisciplinary, because this is where we collaborate with environmental scientists, with ecologists, with biologists to really develop robot-based methods that can help us to better understand and also to protect the nature around us. And I think what is important is that these two lines of research are not separate silos, but they're kind of intertwined. There is very much of an exchange, because when we develop robots with new functionalities, then we can deploy to perform, for example, new environmental monitoring. We can collect new data or access new environment. And at the same time, we have often the chance to bring these robots into the real world and also in this way understand the limits. And this feeds back to our research where we're trying to make robots that are better fit for the natural world.
Yeah. So, I mean, environmental robotics it's a topic that I hadn't heard of until relatively recently. I feel like it's something that appears in my radar more and more these days. So, yeah, I mean, how did you kind of get into this field? When did it come onto your radar?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I guess I've been always very interested in nature and biology. So actually, starting from my Ph.D, I've been always involved in Bioinspired Robotics project. So looking at animals to inspire the development of robots with better performance in terms of locomotion, in terms of sensing. And gradually you see the environment and the nature, which is in a very much critical condition. So I started to ask myself, okay, but can also these robots play a role into this crisis? And so this is how I've started to be more and more interested in really understanding systematically how robots can help us, for example, to mostly acquire data at higher spatial and temporal resolution, which is one of the main bottlenecks that we have today to deliver, data-driven solutions to the environmental crisis, to the biodiversity crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned, having conversations with and collaborations with ecologists and biologists. Yeah. What kind of conversations are you having? What are they telling you and what are you asking them?
So it's, for us, very important to try to understand really what are the problem, in the sense that what we want to do is not to develop technology looking for problem, but really something that it's really useful.
Yeah.
And so when we do environmental robotics, I think for me is extremely important this collaboration and conversation with environmental scientists, because this is what really help us to understand, what type of data we want to collect, which relevant environment do we want to survey. So most of the conversation really are for us a way to understand the problem, and if even it makes sense to develop a robotic solution for this problem.
Yeah. Okay. As you kind of mentioned, your main focus at the moment is robots that can explore and interact with complex and inaccessible natural environments. So what are the key characteristics that a robot needs to be able to achieve that goal?
Yes, so our current focus is a lot on forest and canopy. So this is a very cluttered environment. If you picture, for example, a rainforest, you have this super dense vegetation. So when we work on aerial robots for this environment, it's really about their interactive skills. Inevitably, these robots, by flying in this very dense vegetation, will collide with obstacles, with branches. And so having the possibility, for example, to integrate tactile sensing capacity to complement vision sensing, this is something that it's very interesting for us. And so we are really looking at how can we implement tactile skin on our drones, and gradually also how this very rich tactile information can be used for more robust and effective control strategies, both in terms of navigation, fly through this vegetation, and also enabling new flight modes. So like, for example, pushing through vegetation, which is eventually compliant, and in this way accessing environments that otherwise would not be possible just by, trying to fly around these obstacles. And finally, another capacity that we are exploring a lot is also multimodal mobility. So the capacity of these drones, for example, to land on branches, performing perching so that they can, stay operational for a longer time because we can, shut down the motors. We don't consume energy. Also, we have less noise emitted. So we can, for example, record audio and in this way do some monitoring of, birds or insects.
Fantastic. Yeah. I'm fascinated by this idea of drones pushing through vegetation. I mean, how do you do that without getting bits of leaf stuck in your rotors?
Yeah. Yes, it's a good question. So, indeed, we have sometimes quite some leaves that gets a bit cut by the propeller. But more and more, we have these all-around cages that are actually protecting and shilding our drones and our propellers. So to avoid entanglement as well as damages to the vegetation, we want to avoid. And we're gradually building the technology to make these protective cages also sensitive, so that we have these double functionalities of protection plus distributed tactile sensors, so that we also have an integrated solution that help us to minimize the weight and the complexity of the system, which are always critical aspects to consider with drones.
Yeah. You talked about taking inspiration from biology, from nature. It doesn't sound like you're trying to mimic one specific species. Are you kind of more just generally taking bits and pieces from various different species and kind of using them to make a robot that is a bit of a mishmash of different ideas?
I would say yes. We try to be kind of strategic from this perspective and also pragmatic. I think that is never about really copying nature. It would also be very difficult because living organisms are based on materials and computing strategies that not necessarily we can reproduce one-to-one with our artificial system, but definitely abstracting key working principles or key design strategies or sensing strategies. This is definitely feasible and is what we are doing to try to improve the performance of our robots.
Yeah. Okay. So you're currently working on tree climbing robots to explore inside forest canopies and collect data and biological samples. So can you tell me a bit more about this project?
Yeah, so this is one, I think, of the most exciting project that we work with in the past 4 years. It was mainly about the monitoring of biodiversity in forests. So today we are living, unfortunately, this biodiversity crisis with over 1 million species that are facing extinction in the next 20 years. And it's a very big problem because many functions of the ecosystem depends on these animals or organisms.
Yeah.
And so our also own life to some extent depends on them in terms of food production, provision of clean water and air, just some examples.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking with our colleagues, environmental scientists and biologists, it turns out that one of the big problems in this biodiversity crisis is that it's very hard to measure biodiversity and in this way to track restoration progress and in general to monitor the activity that we deploy to try to avoid this crisis. And the reason is that current monitoring solutions are definitely not scalable in terms of the taxonomic, spatial and temporal scale. And this is where I think robots can play a very important role. And it turns out that one of the environment, at least on terrestrial environment, which host most of the biodiversity are forest canopies, rainforests, for example, but they are extremely hard to survey. And so this is the perfect case study for robots because you can really use robots to access canopies and to collect relevant data to measure biodiversity. And here specifically, we focus a lot on using drones to collect environmental DNA, which are the genetic traces that organisms shed in the environment simply because they lose skin, saliva, feces. And these traces are basically everywhere in the water, in the air, and often deposit also on the surfaces of plants. So with robots, we can basically swap these plants and collect these traces, and then they are analyzed genetically and then associated to the species they come from. And what is very interesting about this survey methodology is that it's a very broad taxonomic coverage. So from a single sample, we can detect organisms from multiple domains of life. So we can detect insects, birds, mammals, and these help us really also to scale this survey from a taxonomical perspective.
It's really, really cool. You know, you mentioned that rainforests are very inaccessible, very difficult to survey. They're also quite a challenging environment for robots, not just because of the kind of dense vegetation, but, you know, you're dealing with heat, humidity, rainfall, and then often a lot of these rainforests are in places in the developing world where infrastructure availability can be challenging. You know, these are all the same problems that biologists run into when they try and go and do experiments in tropical rainforests. You know, how are you kind of coping with and addressing these myriad challenges?
Yes, so these were indeed pretty big challenges for us. So we deployed our robots in rainforest, also pretty remote rainforest in the Amazon in Brazil during the X Prize rainforest competition, which was actually this competition where we took part with. And the logistics is usually a big problem because moving all the equipment, it's definitely tricky. Also, transporting it in the field is not necessarily easy because it's very remote. You have to transfer equipment from one boat to the other and then hike in the middle of the jungle.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is to develop solutions that are modular. So in the sense that you have your drone, and ideally by changing the payload of this drone, you can deploy different survey methodologies. For example, during the X Prize rainforest competition, we mostly focused on drones flying above the canopy, but using a payload that were probes that we were able to deploy inside the canopy. We were able to collect eDNA. By swapping this probe payload with cameras, we were able to perform remote sensing and capture images of the vegetation to detect plants from, the flowers or the shape of the leaves. And we use also drones to deploy canopy rafts, which are sensing platform that sits on top of the canopies and use camera traps and microphones to record the sound of birds or to attract insects and capture images of these insects. So in this way, you have a single robotic system, but you can perform multiple tasks, and this simplify a lot the logistics in the field.
Yeah. I imagine there are a lot of biologists and ecologists who would love to get their hands on this piece of kit.
Yeah, we have collaborations, and definitely it's opening up completely new possibilities, especially when it comes to tree canopies, because this is really, really hard to access them. And, you can't always rely on climbers or literally on cranes to access these trees. So having robots really give us the capacity to survey areas that were previously almost inaccessible.
Yeah. To what extent are these robots acting autonomously versus kind of being remotely operated by a drone pilot?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It was actually one also of the main problem that we faced when deploying our robots in the rainforest for the first time, because during the initial phase of this competition, we were relying on semi-autonomous solutions. In the initial stage of the development, you want to have some human in the loop. It's easier and it's faster. But unfortunately, the communication range between the remote controller and the drone is extremely limited in rainforest because of the density of the vegetation, and also it's very humid. So it's almost like being underwater in terms of a kind of range of communication. So just 200 meters far away from us, we are already losing communication. So then the more we progress in the competition, then we introduce more and more autonomous system to have less reliance on this communication, and then extend really the range of exploration and data collection capacity we had. So for us, autonomy was really key to basically extend the range of operation of our drones.
Yeah, that makes sense. So another strand of research you're working on is drones that can, squeeze through and crawl through really tight spaces. So what was the inspiration for this project, and what roles do you think these robots might play in the future?
Yeah, so that's a new project that is very exciting for us. In general, what we have seen is, if you think about quadrotors, which are probably the most common drone, I think the first manned quadrotor flew at the beginning of the 1900s or something like this. And then, of course, we made a lot of progress, and now we have autonomous quadrotors. But when we look at the design, it's basically stayed the same. And it makes sense to some extent because it's very simple. And this is one of the reasons why quadrotor are also very successful commercially. But especially when we look at animals versus quadrotors, we see a very big difference, which is quadrotors are extremely rigid, while instead, when we look at birds or bats or insects, they're all very, very soft in terms of especially wings.
Yeah.
Actually, the wings of these animals are often 2-3 orders of magnitude softer than quadrotors. And this gives them a very interesting capacity that we struggle to replicate in drones, which is especially the capacity to cope with collisions, also the capacity perhaps to fold and to squeeze, to fly through narrow gap. And so we realized that the more and more we try to fly these drones into complex environment, cluttered natural environment, but you can think also in factories if you're interested for inspection, having these properties of collision resilience, of squeezability are becoming more and more important. And so this is why we started to look more systematically on how can we design soft drones, and specifically how can we enable this capacity of squeezing and collision resilience, but while maintaining also the agility and maneuverability of rigid quadrotors, which is not trivial because once you have something soft, then you start to have a lot of vibration and oscillation and the arms bends everywhere.
Yeah.
So we are basically developing new design strategies and solutions for these type of platforms.
Cool. Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge. So what kinds of materials are you using for these squeezable robots?
So we have been using composite materials for these robots. So like actually conventional drones that we have today, but we are using them in a different way. So we're using mostly in the form of very thin laminates that allow us to really tune the stiffness response of the frame in different directions. And this is what really helping us to try to find the right balance between, softness or squishiness, and also trying to maintain the necessary load-bearing capacity that this frame needs to have to perform quick maneuvering and also fly at good speeds.
Yeah. One thing that I'm always a little bit disappointed about is that there aren't more robots that have flapping wings. You're clearly sticking with the kind of the rotor approach. You don't feel tempted to try mimicking the wing?
I think that flapping is pretty complex.
Yeah.
You're adding another layer of complexity because you couple the structure that generate lifts a lot with also the propulsion. So in the past, I worked also on morphing wings for fixed wing drones, feather-light wings, but while keeping the conventional propulsion with propellers. And these, I think, that already allow us to develop robots with quite interesting capacity in terms of, having extremely extended flight envelope. Although, of course, like transitioning to flapping wings, it's also very, very interesting if you think, for example, about the noise that these drones and propellers are making. Flapping maybe is more interesting from this perspective. So when you look at the invasiveness of our drones, and when you do, for example, biodiversity monitoring, you also want to be relatively quiet and unobtrusive. So maybe this could be a good way forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you decide to go in that direction, definitely let me know. Although I'm wondering if maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way, because I think there's a famous saying of, if evolution could have invented the wheel, it would have done, but it's just not kind of possible in the way that evolution works. I wonder if maybe if evolution could have invented the quadcopter, then it would have done.
Yeah, I mean, it's complex. As I said, it's very difficult because there are so many ways you can solve, a problem. And sometimes it also depends on what type of resources and what type of material and constraints you have available. And we recently started a very interesting project. It's a new project called Spear, where we are trying to co-evolve the body and brain of soft robots to have more sort of a task-specific drones.
Okay.
And there we are exactly trying to understand when we have specific building blocks. So what type of platform do we develop? So it would be interesting to see this sort of a co-evolution process, what type of platforms will develop. And maybe it's completely different from something that we as designer can think of, or maybe also very different from what nature has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Evolutionary robotics is really cool.
Yeah.
Stefano, it's been fascinating chatting to you today. I've been speaking to Stefano Mintchev from ETH Zürich. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoy Robot Talk, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the podcast, subscribe, and leave a review. And check out @Robot Talk Pod on social media to see a photo of a robot that Stefano worked on, the E-drone, helping to monitor biodiversity by collecting genetic traces left behind by organisms on trees. I thought you might like to hear a sneak peek of this month's bonus episode.
The current systems that are deployed, those are kind of pre-programmed machines. You need to provide a lot of information to the robots so that it can do its task fully autonomously, but you provide this information. So the robots that are deployed nowadays typically use only information about the geometric space and don't use semantic information. So they don't distinguish in, here on the ground, there's a pallet or it's an equipment lying around. Me as a human, I can distinguish between, right? This is equipment, I should not step on it. This is pallet, I might step on it, I won't break it. And so this semantic information is often not used yet. So it's about, estimating the traversability of the environment as well. So should I walk through this puddle of water, or might there be a hole below, right? Same walking on ice, right? How slippery is it really? And so on. Distinguishing these kind of things is not yet there, I would say, at least in reality.
Yeah.
There are some challenges regarding safety that obviously limit the applicability of these machines. So in places where probably humans are not so much in contact with the robot, and then where safety is not critical. But I will say that to expand the deployment of these machines in a broader, spectrum of industry, I think safety and standardization is important.
Sure.
Traditionally, keeping people and robots safe meant that there's always an emergency stop button on a wall where the robot is operating. And this works really well for industrial automation type of robots. So we can imagine, robots that are used now or have been used since the 70s, I guess, in the automotive industry, right? They're building cars and doing spot welding and things like that. Or, in industries where you have a factory floor, robots are sort of caged away. People don't go near them. Or you have manipulators that are bolted on the ground or bolted on a tabletop, right? You have a button that you push, and then this cuts the power and the robot stays where it is. This is really different now for quadrupeds and human. And so you can imagine if a quadruped messes up while it's going up a flight of stairs, if you cut the power there, it's going to start rolling down the stairs, right? Or if there's a robot, a humanoid near a person, and you cut the power, then the robot's going to fall on the person or sort of do a lot more damage falling down, right? So we have to come up with different ideas about what safety is and how we can implement this also mechanically and kind of in software as well.
If you'd like to hear more from this bonus episode, sign up as a supporter on Patreon by going to patreon.com/Claire Asher. You'll get access to the full catalogue of bonus episodes, plus lots of other cool supporter perks. I'll be taking a break for the holidays, but Robot Talk will be back on the 9th of January, when I'll be speaking to Christine Evers from the University of Southampton about advanced robot hearing. Until then, I've been Claire Asher, and this has been Robot Talk. Robot Talk Season 6 is sponsored by the Hamlin Centre, Imperial College London.